The most profound delusion of the human ego is the belief that domination is achieved through the edge of a blade. We are conditioned by history to worship the conqueror, the man who leaves a trail of burning empires, crushed rebellion, and absolute terror in his wake. For decades, the ancient world trembled at the mention of one name, Ashoka. He was not just a ruler, he was a brutal force of nature, an absolute tyrant who believed that raw power was the only absolute currency of human existence. To manifest his internal darkness, he constructed Ashoka's hell, a literal torture complex disguised as a luxury palace. It was explicitly engineered to maximize human agony, a physical playground built to break the sovereign will of his captives. He executed his own biological brothers to clear his path to the throne, eliminated every subtle voice of dissent, and viewed humanity as nothing but cattle to be driven by the whip of fear. He operated on the primitive assumption that to rule, you must force the external world into total submission. But raw physical violence is an insecure tool. It only works as long as your blade remains sharp and your guards stay loyal. The moment you choose to rule through terror, you cease to be a master and become a prisoner of your own paranoia. Your empire becomes a fragile glass fortress, waiting for a single stone of rebellion to shatter it. True sovereignty cannot exist when your mind is constantly scanning the palace halls for the next betrayal, checking your golden chalice for poison, and sleeping with a heavy iron dagger beneath your pillow. The aggressive dictator who controls millions of bodies through the threat of death is often the most terrified entity in the entire kingdom. He is a permanent slave to the very fear he projects onto the crowd. Every tyrant eventually meets his Kalinga, the absolute boundary where physical force runs out of utility and exposes its own structural futility. The invasion of Kalinga was not a war, it was an industrial slaughter. The Diaram River ran completely thick with human blood, its moving waters choked by the weight of over 100,000 rotting corpses, turning the landscape into a desaturated nightmare. Another 150,000 human beings were driven from their ancestral homes, reduced to starving, faceless refugees wandering through the smoldering ash of what used to be their lives. As the smoke cleared and the agonizing screams faded into a heavy, suffocating silence, the emperor walked onto the battlefield to survey the exact coordinates of his ultimate victory. As the smoke cleared and the agonizing screams faded into a heavy, suffocating silence, the emperor walked onto the battlefield to survey the exact coordinates of his ultimate victory. But an elite intellect strips away the layers of political propaganda. Ashoka looked down at the pale faces of dead children, the empty eyes of widowed women, and felt a cold, crushing weight drop into his chest. He realized he had traded thousands of living human consciousnesses for a few more inches of dirt. He had successfully conquered the physical geography of Kalinga, but he had completely ruined his own soul. The transition from an absolute tyrant to a sovereign master does not happen overnight. Returning from the blood-soaked plains of Kalinga, Ashoka walked back into his golden palace, but the gold had completely lost its luster. The massive banquets, the endless praise of his court, and the piles of tribute from conquered lands now felt like an elaborate mockery. He had achieved the absolute peak of external abundance, only to confront the terrifying reality of his own internal poverty. The matrix of ancient geopolitics watched him closely. Neighboring empires, hearing whispers of the emperor's sudden silence, began to sharpen their weapons, assuming that a king crippled by guilt would be an easy target for invasion. But Ashoka did not retreat into a state of cowardice. He did not abandon his throne to live as a helpless monk in the forest. Instead, he executed a radical psychological mutation, shifting the entire theater of war from the external map to the internal psyche. He initiated Dhammavijaya, the absolute conquest of self through unyielding righteousness. He realized that the ultimate test of a predator is not how many external enemies he can slaughter, but whether he can conquer the wild, reactive beast inside his own skull. When the royal edicts announced that the empire would no longer pursue aggressive territorial expansion, the crowd assumed the Mauryan Empire had grown soft. They mistook a strategic shift in consciousness for absolute weakness. This was a fatal miscalculation. Ashoka did not disband his veteran legions. He did not melt down the imperial war swords or leave the borders unguarded. The massive Mauryan war machine remained fully armed, silent, and standing. True peace is never the virtue of the weak who cannot fight. It is the calculated, dominant choice of a predator who has absolute control over his capacity for massive destruction. If you are harmless only because you lack the teeth to bite, you are not peaceful. You are simply weak. To rebuild his mind from first principles, Ashoka had to confront the terrifying architecture of his past. He had to live with the heavy knowledge that he was the creator of Ashoka's Hell, the literal torture palace that defined his early reign. The average individual runs away from their dark side, chasing cheap external distractions, modern screens, and social validation to escape the haunting memory of their own failures. A master does the exact opposite. Ashoka sat in absolute isolation with his shame. He looked his worst version dead in the eye, refused to make excuses to the universe, and used that raw, burning internal pain as the foundational concrete to rebuild his discipline. He established the Dhamma protocol, a ruthless, unyielding psychological framework designed to rule his own emotions with an iron fist. He realized that an untamed mind projects chaos outward, but a conquered mind forces reality to bend to its alignment. He stopped operating on the chaotic whims of personal pride, anger, and ego. He realized that a leader who reacts instantly to every insult or provocation is not a ruler at all. He is just a highly suggestible puppet being played by external variables. By placing an unbreachable gap between external stimulus and his internal response, he achieved a state of weaponized calm. His silent presence became so heavy and complete that it commanded obedience without needing to spill a single drop of blood. But he knew that human memory is a fragile, decaying medium. To ensure that this brutal philosophy of self-mastery outlived his physical body, he turned his attention to the ultimate media of absolute permanence: solid stone. He rejected the fragile nature of paper, parchment, and spoken declarations. He knew that if a message is meant to endure for millennia, it must be cut directly into the bedrock of the planet. Ashoka ordered the erection of massive, 50-foot monolithic sandstone pillars across thousands of miles of his empire, turning the geographical landscape into a physical textbook of self-mastery. These columns were not built to glorify his military triumphs. They were architectural mirrors designed to remind the passing crowds of their own internal duty and moral boundaries. Apply this first principle to your modern existence. Stop writing your ambitions in temporary digital apps or loose notebooks. Carve your non-negotiables into your environment so deeply that you have no choice but to execute. In this grand architecture of permanence, the emperor executed a complete inversion of royal narcissism. He ruthlessly destroyed the traditional ego trap that ruins every standard ruler. Most kings spend the wealth of conquered nations building gargantuan statues of their own faces, demanding that the herd sing hymns to their vanity and bow to their name. Ashoka stripped his own name from the public narrative. In his stone edicts, he did not refer to himself as the supreme conqueror or the king of kings. Instead, he adopted the title Divanampriya Priyadarshi, the beloved of the divine, he who looks upon all of humanity with the affection of a father. By shifting his identity from an owner of the population to a sovereign servant of human consciousness, he became entirely immune to small insults and political betrayals. When you kill your personal vanity and tie your daily execution to a cosmic purpose larger than your own comfort, you neutralize the power of your enemies to hurt your feelings. The crowd treats morality as a soft, emotional luxury that has no place in the brutal arena of power and survival. Ashoka viewed morality through the cold lens of cosmic realpolitik. He recognized that the universe operates on an unyielding mathematical law of cause and effect, that every act of structural tyranny seeds the exact coordinates of its own eventual collapse. The Dhamma was not a religious sermon or a mystical plea. It was a highly logical strategic blueprint for a sustainable empire that requires minimal resources to police and govern. A society anchored in mutual respect, truth, and rigorous self-restraint governs itself from within, freeing the sovereign to focus purely on building an immortal legacy. Stop chasing short-term toxic hacks that destroy your long-term reputation. Play the long game of absolute strategic integrity, because the laws of cause and effect remain completely undefeated. The ultimate test of an empire's strategic blueprint is what happens when the architect is no longer in the room. Weak systems built on individual charisma or forced tyranny disintegrate the exact second the leader stops breathing. Ashoka cared absolutely nothing for the temporary survival of a biological family name on a golden throne. He understood that flesh rots, dynasties collapse, and wealth is stolen, but a structured psychological shift can alter the course of human history forever. Instead of training his children to become aggressive military conquerors to protect his physical borders, he chose to train them to be unyielding vessels of absolute self-mastery. He sent his own biological son, Mahindra, and his daughter, Sangamitra, across vast oceans and treacherous mountain ranges as bare-footed monks, carrying nothing but the silent seeds of the Dhamma. They carried no iron weapons, commanded no violent legions, and offered no political threats. Yet they successfully conquered distant nations like Sri Lanka purely through the heavy weight of their moral alignment. This is the ultimate architecture of an immortal legacy. You do not build an enduring empire by forcing people to serve your fragile ego. You build it by planting unshakable principles so deeply into the human mind that time itself cannot erase them. Look directly at the current state of your own modern existence. The matrix of society actively encourages you to behave like a primitive, unevolved beast, reacting instantly to every notification and chasing cheap digital dopamine. You are living your daily life as a volunteer for your own misery, constantly whining about your circumstances and blaming your past failures, your genetics, or your environment for the chaotic state of your internal kingdom. It is time to execute the ultimate internal revolt against your own weakness. Look at the smoldering ashes of your worst mistakes not as a life sentence, but as the raw volcanic bedrock upon which you will build your unshakable citadel. Accept the brutal reality that no one is coming to save you, no external event is going to magically fix your broken focus, and you are the absolute, sole dictator of the processing unit inside your own skull. Ruthlessly amputate the toxic mental clutter from your environment. Cut the heavy cords of superficial relationships, minor comforts, and modern distractions that are actively draining your limited attention for someone else's financial profit. Lean directly into the heavy crucible of absolute isolation until the silence stops terrifying you, and your own disciplined mind becomes your absolute favorite sanctuary, a fortress that nothing on this earth can manipulate. Let the chaotic seasons change, let the unexpected storms of life rage furiously around your borders, and let the small minds cast their petty insults into the wind. You must develop the heavy equilibrium of a massive granite mountain. The ultimate choice belongs entirely to you. You can continue running away from your internal void through cheap entertainment, or you can drop your primitive, reactive weapons and step into the arena of self-conquest. Rule your awareness with an absolute iron fist. Lock in your mechanical execution, subscribe to the eternal mind right now, close the doors to all external distractions, and let your absolute silence build history.